Welcome to Strathroy and District Historical Society's online presentation of Onion Skins and Peach Fuzz, Memories of Ontario Farmerettes by Shirleyan English and Bonnie Sitter. This presentation took place on March 15th, 2021 via Zoom. For more information, please visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/Strathroy Historical Society or visit our website at sdhsociety.weebly.com.
So if you can hear me, I'm going to do a little bit of speaking and then I'm going to turn it over to Shirleyan and she'll come back to me to finish it off. So this is the cover, both the front and back cover of our book, Onion Skins and Peach Fuzz. And Shirleyan and I had a lot of fun doing this book. And I think from the reviews that we've had, a lot of other people have had a good time reading it as well. I'm going to tell you how it came about. I was downsizing at the time. There comes a time when stuff has to be sorted and sometimes discarded. Photographs were on the purging list, and I decided to look over the photo albums and loose pictures that had belonged to my husband, Conrad. He had grown up on a farm on the outskirts of Bedford, where the Sitter family specialized in growing Dutch set onions, celery, and peppermint. From the pile, I picked up a photograph, and that's the one that's on the screen now. The three girls sitting on the running board of an old car. I looked at it, not recognizing anyone, so I turned it over, and on the reverse it said Farmerettes, about 1946. And I thought, well, I have never heard of Farmerettes. I'm wondering what they're all about. Of course, too late to ask my husband because he had died and his brother was gone as well. So I thought, well, I'll start doing some research and see what I can find. I discovered that there wasn't a lot of information about the Farmerettes. There had been a novel written for teenage girls about Farmerettes, but that wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for the stories about the girls that really were Farmerettes. So I researched and a girlfriend in Blythe, Ontario said to me, "What are you up to these days, Bonnie?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing research on the Farmerettes." And she said, "Would you like to speak to one?" I said, "I sure would." She said, "Well, my mother was a Farmerette. She lived in Toronto and was a Farmerette in St. Catharines area. And now she lives in Goderich." So she arranged an interview and I got enough material from that interview to do an article for the publication called The Rural Voice. Noreen Pye, P-Y-E was her name at that time. She's Noreen Trevolgi now. But as a teenager, she agreed to volunteer to lend a hand with the market gardening and the orchard work in the Niagara Peninsula. She wrote 17 letters home while she was there, and her mother saved those letters and gave them back to her. So I was able to read all those letters, which gave me a good handle on what life was like in a farmerette camp. So I did the article. The editor sat on it for a while, not sure that she thought this was, going to go anywhere, but I think she needed to fill up some space. So she put it in the magazine. A lady in London, Ontario had a subscription. She read it, passed it to another friend who read it. And that friend thought, "I think Shirleyan said she was a farmerette." So she passed it on to Shirleyan. She read it and discovered that she recognized the name Sitter because she had worked on my in-laws' farm the last year of the program, 1952. And she dated the man who became my brother-in-law. So when I tracked her down and found this information, we were having a grand chat, and she said, "Well, in 1995, I finished working at the London Free Press, and she said, I put an ad in papers across Ontario saying, if you were a farmerette, get in touch with me. I'm thinking of writing a story." Well, about 300 ladies wrote to her. Some of them actually wrote what their experiences were. Some of them said, "Send me the questionnaire." Some said, "What do you want to know?" Some said, "Give me a call, I'd like to help." well, I said to Shirleyan, do you still have the pictures or still have the letters? And she said, yes, and a few pictures. So I said, well, dig them out. We are going to write a book. So she did dig them out, and I started reading 300 letters and putting them in piles, ones that had complete stories, one that had anecdotes, and away we went. We agreed when we went ahead with the project that we would try to do it in a year, promising the Farmerettes. I did find that I would have a book for them by the end of 2019. They're all in their senior years, and I knew, time was really critical. So I started phoning the ladies, and some of them said they would be happy to write their stories and send me pictures. So away we went, and back and forth. And then somebody that you folks might know down your way, Paul and Mary Janes that live in Warwick. I called Paul about using a story, and he said, if you need some help scanning pictures, I'd be delighted to help. So if you know those folks and have the opportunity, please let them know that I did mention them on or in the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Shirleyan to tell you a little bit more about it. I can leave the picture in the background if that works. I don't know. I'll stop share so that Shirleyan can share. Okay. Hope I'm doing that right. Why can't I do that? There we go. Okay. Shirleyan there?
Shirleyan, you're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. You can tell I'm not technologically gifted here. Okay, I'm going to be reading from the book itself. And this chapter is called In the Beginning, and it'll give you some background on how this, not just the book came about, but how Farmerettes came about. The Second World War began in September 1939. By then, most of the crops in Ontario for that year were finished or being harvested. But farmers, always looking ahead to the next spring, must have been concerned, if not feeling some panic, when large numbers of young men working in farm labor began to enlist. Something had to be done immediately to ensure a steady supply of workers, or fresh food wouldn't be produced the following summer. So the provincial government stepped in and established the Ontario Farm Service Force to recruit workers from all levels of society. The motto was, "We lend a hand." The Department of Agriculture's 1942 annual report says, quote, "The force consists of all those from 12 years of age up to 85 or more, who are willing and able to help relieve the farm labor situation, and who can give any time from a few evenings a week up to 12 months of continuous service." End of quote. This was no small operation, but was a massive undertaking. The force was divided into 7 brigades to cover a wide spectrum of the population, except for adult men who was assumed would be enlisting. This went all the way through from the Children's Brigade for children over 12 years, the Farm Cadet Brigade for young men from 15 up to military age, the Farmerette Brigade for all young women 16 years of age and upward from educational institutions, the Women's Land Brigade for all young women not in educational institutions, but who volunteered for farm service. And then there was the Farm Girls Brigade for all young farm women up to 26 years of old but not in school or college, who undertook to help with farm operations. Then there was the Holiday Service Brigade for all men and women prepared to give from a week or up to 2 to 3 months of holidays, either helping on a farm, at home, or in regular farm work. And finally, there was the Farm Commando Brigade for all who are unable to leave home, but willing to spend time to help a nearby farmer and to return home at night. It's a small miracle that this project was organized and working so quickly, and that it continued to expand as the war went on. First, there was the Ontario Interdepartmental Committee, and it was set up to recruit farm help. Recruitment for farmerettes was done through the schools, which meant involving the Department of Education. Working conditions had to be monitored, which involved the Federal Department of Labor. The YMCA, under their national councils, undertook supervision and staffing of the girls and the boys' camps, and they were to look after food, discipline, housing, recreation, and health. The farm labor force had an objective of 10,000 farm volunteers for 1942. It registered 23,041. By the end of the war in 1945, 35,000 people were enrolled in farm service and stationed on 54 farms, including the camps. The largest participation by far was the Farmerette Brigade. So popular was this section that it lasted until 1952, 7 years after the war ended. So the book we wrote is really the Farmerettes story. So I'll read a little bit about the work and what it encompassed, and then I'll read you my experience of arriving in Bedford in 1952. Officially, they were the Ontario Farm Service Force, but they became known as the Farmerettes. The work was hard, often grueling. The sun was broiling, and the pay was a pittance. But these teenage girls, most with no farm experience whatsoever, learned and persevered. They climbed ladders for cherries and peaches. They weeded celery, cucumbers, and onions on hands and knees. They packed peaches and spent hours softly rubbing onions on wire mesh to remove the dried outer skins. They developed muscles and tans, and they helped save the harvest. As we write this book in 2019, many decades after their farm experience, their memories remain clear and warm. The government departments had just wanted to get an urgent job done. But for those girls who responded, most agreed, excuse me, it was one of the best summers of their life. I came to Bedford in the summer of 1952 from North Bay in Northern Ontario. I was 16 years old. I had just completed grade 12 and I had never worked on a farm. My first experience was weeding celery. And I remember being the only one working with the farmer who picked me up at the camp in a very old car and who had a tendency to meander all over the road as he drove. Another day I was transferred to a cucumber patch where I worked with other girls, weeding on hands and knees, trying to avoid the prickly stuff on the vines. But then I began working for the Sitter family, where the specialty was onions and peppermint and celery. And I remained with them the rest of the summer. There was Nicholas, whom we called Grandpa Sitter. William or Bill, his son, and grandson George, whom I ended up dating most of the summer. Being from Northern Ontario, I had never seen a large farm field. And at my first sight of Dutch onion sets marching in rows, seemingly to the horizon, my jaw dropped. I thought they went on forever. We weeded them on our hands and knees, 3 rows at a time, straddling a middle row. And when they were finished, to the farmer's specifications, we went on to hoeing peppermint, fortunately standing on our feet. Late in the summer, the peppermint was harvested and dried. It became sort of like hay. The sitters had a large still in one field in which the peppermint was distilled into oil and sold to Wrigley's Gum at the end of the season. Then we went back to the onions, pulling them up by hand once they were mature, leaving them on the ground for the tops to dry. Back-breaking work. The next step was to softly rub the onions on a large sieve inset into a table-like structure. We did this all day with the chaff flying off in all directions and all over us, into our hair, down our blouses, into our shoes. Literally every nook and cranny of our bodies. At the end of the day, we were filthy. Rushed to the showers back at the camp, racing each other for first spot. And next day, we did it all again. Okay. I think what most farmerettes remember, besides the work, was the leisure time. We didn't have a lot of it. We had Saturday and Sunday, sometimes only half a Saturday. But the leisure time was probably what former farmerettes remember the most. At least it was likely the fun that produced the warmest memories, colored the experience. Were conversations while working, the singing, the jokes, laughter. Teenagers 16 or 17 years of age are usually carefree. And when in a group, large or small, working together, the atmosphere is set for good times. Personally, I don't remember any teenage angst at the time. We seemed to get along extremely well. My most vivid experience was sneaking out with some girls one evening and being picked up by a group of young reservists from the nearby Ipperwash cadet camp. All prearranged, I discovered. Someone had an old car, and we all piled in, heading for the beach in an impromptu party. After parking near the camp, we were suddenly surrounded by popping noises, flashing lights, and shadowy figures. A man in uniform appeared at the window, wanted to know curtly what we were doing there. Well, immediately, the boys in the car became serious, called him sir, and were ordered to get the car out of there. They did. We had ended up in a mock battle, which the cadets from Ipperwash camp were having. The car somehow disappeared, and we had to wait for a ride. Bedford camp, I should point out to you, was just 4 miles away from the Ipperwash camp. We reached Bedford camp just before 7 a.m., snuck up the outside stairs, but there was no time to go to bed before we were called for breakfast. I worked all that day and went to bed the following night, right after supper, and I never sneaked out again. Looking back, it's remarkable how we adapted to the work, how enjoyable it became to be with a group, working together despite the hot sun and the low pay. Of course, there were benefits. At Bedford in 1952, the jukebox on site meant we could have weekly dances where local farm fellows and cadets from nearby Ipperwash used to drop in. We used to get dates and go to Grand Bend to dance, or to movies in Forest or Park Hill. We'd hitchhike, 2 or 3 together, go to Grand Bend to swim, or sometimes as far as Port Huron in the US to buy the latest fad clothing like poodle skirts. One time a carnival was set up on Bedford's main street. We went on all the rides. Mostly though, we sat around and chatted, getting to know each other, making friends. Once or twice the local lads built a bonfire in a back field and we'd go out and sit around the fire chatting. Some necked or snuggled, but there was no alcohol, no drugs, a much different time. We also became strong. The physical work hardening our muscles. My bare feet toughened so I could walk easily without shoes. Undoubtedly, we became the healthiest we had ever been and maybe would ever be again. What's next? To give the girls some incentive, the government adapted a poem by Edgar Guest, and the poem was called "It Can Be Done," but they changed it. I'm sorry, his poem was "It Couldn't Be Done," but the Ontario Farm Service Force changed it to "It Can Be Done." And I'll read you the poem, it's kind of cute. The girls were asked to carry this poem around them if they ever felt like flagging off or were too tired to work or something like that. Somebody said it couldn't be done, but he with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with the trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one has done it." But he took off his coat, he took off his hat, and the first thing we knew, he'd begun it. With a lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle it in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that couldn't be done, and you'll do it. I'm going to read you one of the letters that one of the farmerettes wrote to us. Just to give you an example, and that's what this book is basically. It's letters from former farmerettes and also essays that they wrote. This is from a woman named Artis Daniels. She was in 1945 in Cottam Camp. My parents worked hard for everything we had. At the time, we were called comfortable, which would be regarded as poor now. So outfitting me for the summer was a burden. I was proud of the fact that I supported myself for almost 3 months without resorting to asking for donations. I turned 16 while at Cottam, cut my first wisdom tooth, and tried smoking. 1 cigarette and I decided it wasn't for me. Smartest decision I ever made. We must have traveled by bus to Leamington which we understood was our destination. There were camps at Kingsville and Cottam for girls, and Harrow and Leamington for boys. The fact that we were to be stuck out in the sticks for a whole summer was a shock to some. Corona Wendorf was my friend from Clinton, and we were used to a lack of excitement, so we just adjusted easily. As near as I can remember, there were about 75 girls in this camp. At first, we modestly dressed and undressed under our nighties, but the fact that the hot water gave out quickly changed us. After 2 days, we dashed in the door and stripped on the way to the showers, and clothes were picked up on your way back to your bunk. It was fun. A group of farmers supported the camp. Each day they would put in a request for X number of girls. We had a labor secretary who looked after the work arrangements. We weeded strawberries and raspberries, and then as the seasons progressed, we picked the fruit at so much a quart. I'm ashamed to admit that I just made my quota in strawberries. To this day, I hate picking them. We carried bagged lunches. Each camper made her own lunch from an array of materials provided by the kitchen. Although these lunches were simply parked in the shade until lunch, I don't recall any sickness from botulism or anything like that. The camp was run by Eli Thompson, our labor secretary, Miss Thompson, the camp mother, and the kitchen staff. Poor Miss Thompson used to wander around muttering, "Money, money," always going out but never coming in. We paid board of about $5 a week, but her funds were likely barely sufficient. Her pet remedy for anything was calamine. So we used to sing an old camp song. The mother at this camp, they say, is mighty fine, but when you're sick and dying, she feeds you calamine. For the last 6 weeks of camp, a lot of us were put to work detasseling corn for our hybrid corn. A truck picked us up each morning. We didn't go in for glamour. Everyone's nose was daubed with Noxzema. You went along between 2 rows of female corn and pulled the tassels on each side. The plants were taller than we were, so we faced the sun all day. I remember having a distinctive tan, my bra straps and overall straps forming a pattern, and that was through a fleece long-sleeve t-shirt. We hitchhiked a lot. It's understood you never traveled alone. Sometimes a truck would take us into Leamington to swim. We hitched to Windsor on occasion, and we bowled a bit. To save money, we took turns being the pin boy. Swimming in Lake Erie was an experience. Even in 1945, there were dead fish floating about. We'd grown up swimming in Lake Huron, so the warmer water in Erie was nice, but I never adjusted to bumping into a dead fish. We had a camp council to keep us in order. There was a curfew, a time for lights out. One night, Pee Wee Pagnini was caught talking after hours, and the conversation went like this. "Pee Wee, you must pay a 25-cent fine." "Oh, geez, guys, 30 cents. "Oh, you bums, 40 cents. I think it ended at about 50 cents, and she was grounded for a night. Somehow she obtained a can of white paint. We had 2 outhouses with partitions, and the next day they sported signs, library, nonfiction, history, etc. We loved Pee Wee. Our camp was surrounded by farmland, and cows roamed the field in front of the Johns. They were guarded by an electric fence, which sort of guarded us as well. If you came back to camp after hours, the best way in was through the cow pasture, so we quite often got shocked. Johnny Farkas drove the hybrid truck. He and I dated the last few weeks of camp. He came with a friend, Harvey, one night for a group fun night. One of the campers, Heisel, decided to take Harvey's car and go for a joyride. Pat Hill tried to stop her, but ended up with her, likely hoping to talk some sense into her. The first we knew of it was when the police showed up at camp. The girls had smashed up in a ditch. The next day, Heisel was sitting in the lounge and heard Pat saying something, and she started to cry and said, "Oh God, it's good to hear your voice." There had been hot oil all over them the night before in the accident, and she had heard one policeman remark, "I think this one's had it." He had mistook the oil for blood in the dark. There were girls from Timmins and Kirkland Lake, Hamilton and Toronto. Malvern Collegiate was well represented. Trenton, Belleville, Harriston, Stratford, Glencoe, Windsor, and of course, Corunna and I from Clinton. On VJ, that is Victory over Japan Day, we convinced Eli, with her boss, that we should have a holiday. I don't know what the rest of the camp did, but June Kettle, Doreen Muff Mulford, Corunna, and I hitchhiked to Detroit. We had 20 cents, 10 cents to go over, 10 cents to come back, plus our bag lunches, which we ate sitting on the curb of the main street in Detroit. My mom was horrified because she expected us to be chaperoned. But can you imagine trying to chaperone that many girls? Toadie from Timmins was the only one I know who ran into any trouble hitching, and she went alone, which was a no-no. Then she talks a bit about getting together with other camps, and they sang camp songs, things like that. I can't remember how we did our regular washing. Hand laundry, I remember, but our overalls and stuff must have had to be done by machine. The fact that we had to buy our own shampoo, toothpaste, soap, and sanitary supplies made us more responsible than my own girls were at 16. I'm sure it was a beneficial experience that kids from today's society would likely enjoy also. Hitching rides, of course, would be out, so maybe it wouldn't work as well. But it's a cinch that hard work and rules of conduct never hurt anybody. And she liked it so much, she went back the next year, but was not at the same farm. Anyway. Okay, Bonnie, I'm going to send it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, am I loud and clear?
Yes, you are, but your presentation is not full screen, so I'm not sure if you want to hit the play button again.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There we go. Okay, so the Farmerettes were given a badge and they were told that it should be sewn on their bib overalls. This one from 1943, just a little bit different than the other ones because it was Food for Victory was added to the We Lend a Hand motto. Recruitment for the Farmerettes and the other brigades, you would see posters, you would see that advertised in newspapers saying, you know, sign up, spend your vacation on a farm. So there's some other ones that we gathered from Clinton newspapers, Toronto newspapers. People went out into the schools and talked to the students, encouraging them to lend a hand. And a big hook, I guess you would call it, was they called it camp, and most girls would never have a hope of going to camp. This seemed like a real opportunity. If you had good marks, you could be excused from school early, leave sometimes even in April, and be excused from exams and still get your year. So that was a pretty big hook. One girl said she was doing lousy at physics, so it was her best hope. So here we have a girl on the left picking peaches. She's got a harness on so that the harness holds the basket while she can use both hands to pick. There's a girl on her lunch hour taking a smoke, and girls on the right picking grapes. The back-breaking work of picking or harvesting asparagus, the girls really found that a difficult job. And while asparagus season was on, it was every day because the asparagus would grow overnight and it was ready to be picked again. So we see a girl carrying a celery, and obviously this photographer from Montreal magazine, like if you remember what the Star Weekly looked like, it was that type of a magazine, and he called it the rear guard. And of course, all the girls' rear ends up in the air. Could have easily been taken from the other direction, but I guess it wouldn't have been as much fun. So the farmers in the beginning, a lot of them thought this is not going to work. Girls from the city are not going to be able to work on the farm and be of any help. But they quickly changed their minds, and they said, you know, we would take more if more girls were available. We could put them to work. So you see on the truck, it was Mr. Giles from Fonthill. And the girl on the right was actually a war evacuee from England. She came with about 44 other girls and 2 teachers to a private school in Toronto for the duration of the war. Her parents were in India. Her dad was the secretary, the Home Secretary for the British government. And he and his wife were in England. So she was on her own during the war with girlfriends going to Branscombe Hall in Toronto. She enrolled for Farmerettes and went to Waterford Camp. Her daughter was writing up her mother's diaries, came across the word Farmerette and found me. And so now we have pictures and her story. So here we are staking tomatoes, suckering the tomato plants. And on the right, you'll see the job that Shirleyan was talking about, rubbing the onions across the screen, and the dead skin and the dust flew from these onions up their noses, in their ears, down their blouses. And some girls remarked that when they came back to Farmerette camp, after a day working for the sitters, they either smelled like onions or peppermint. So a doodle bug. Lots of the farm pictures that we were collecting showed these farm vehicles. And during the war, when there was a lack of tractors and trucks, farmers would buy a doodle bug conversion kit and change their Model A or Model T Ford into a farm vehicle. The people in Orillia, Ontario, went down into Illinois where they were making these products, these conversion kits, and said, we'd like to make arrangements to make these conversion kits in Canada. And they said, oh, just buy one and copy it. So things were a lot simpler in the early 1940s. Girls had some fun. Here you see a Mr. Farmer contest. And Ernest Neff from St. Catharines was the winner, and he was judged on his tan, size of his feet, and the calluses on his hands. That's how he got to be Mr. Farmer. On the right, you see the girls, one there in her bare feet working at the onions. Lots of onion fields around the Bedford area. Girls with their wide-brimmed hats. The girls were given a list of things that they should bring to camp with them, and they were encouraged to bring wide-brimmed hats and bandanas, as well as the bib overalls. This is a picture from the Bedford area, working in the onion fields. Not great pictures, but still showing the tables where the onions were rubbed. So the girls on the left are farmerettes from World War II. The ones on the right, farmerettes from World War I. People often ask if there were farmerettes in the First War, and there were. But the peach fuzz that became part of our title was a pretty annoying part of picking peaches. They were much fuzzier then than they are now. And a little excerpt from our book, Inga was her name. As it happened, after the cherries and early plums were finished, came the peaches, which Inga describes as my Waterloo. It turned out she was violently allergic to peach fuzz. After several weeks of struggling with an itchy, seeping rash, the doctor advised that I go home with the understanding that I could return for the apple harvest. I never did return because by that time I was completing my summer of war work by packing cans at the Campbell Soup Company on the 4 to midnight shift. I would have much preferred to have been picking apples in Beamsville, but in those days, you didn't have much choice in the matter. You went where you were told. So this is a doodlebug at the Bedford camp. The people around Bedford often called the Farmerettes camp girls. They weren't just Farmerettes, they had another nickname, camp girls. So you can see why the young man in the front of this picture is smiling. All the rest with them are lovely young Farmerettes at Bedford camp again. And the picture on the right, we discovered a lady in London, Ontario, who, when she got a copy of the book, let us know that she's the girl top right-hand corner. So she's in the book actually about 4 times. So this was how you took a bath when you were at St. David's camp. There was an overhang over the barn and you got the tubs out, you put the water in and you tried to put your bum down and get your body washed off. And the girl in the back was from Clinton. She's the only one that we know. Her name was Helen Herman. Often we would get a picture of girls posing with the farmer's tractor. It was always a lot of fun. Miriam Carter, who lives in Listowel, sent me this picture of picking the strawberries. And you can see the circle on her bib overalls, that's her badge. So these girls are arriving at Farmerette camp or else leaving. I'm not sure, the sign's there, but it doesn't say enter here or anything. They didn't have a lot of personal space, whether they were in tents or in Nissen huts or in school gymnasiums or in converted barns. There wasn't a lot of personal space. What you brought in your suitcase, a lot of it had to stay in that suitcase. Occasionally there would be a nail and a hanger, but there wasn't space for a lot of things. So sometimes there was double bunk beds, sometimes there were singles. This camp on the left was at Waterford. Girls on the right rode these bicycles from Montreal to the Niagara Peninsula, if you can imagine. What a long haul. Another picture of the camp girls. So this is my husband's grandfather. This is Grandpa Sitter that Shirleyan mentioned. And I think in the picture, there's about 8 farmerettes. One of the farmerettes wrote and said that Grandpa Sitter kept their hose sharp, which made a hard job a lot easier. So there they are, a group picture, all lovely young ladies, all enjoying the camaraderie. That was a really big thing. One farmerette wrote that the local cemetery needed to be cleaned up for Decoration Day, so they found equipment, and the girls went over and did that for the local cemetery committee. So a typical picture with the girls with the rubber boots on, no badge on the bib overalls, but she's one of the few that left the legs down. Most of the pictures, the girls had the legs rolled up so they could go home with a nice tan. Picture at the top was from down in Essex County, and those are tomatoes in those baskets. The girls with the jackets on, they are transplanting. That's an early spring picture from the Shank Farmerette camp. This is Bedford. This is what the onions look like. Shirleyan described pulling out the onions and leaving them to dry in piles in the fields. This gal is still alive, and I email her and speak to her on a fairly regular basis. And she did 2 summers at Bedford camp. Newspapers carried pictures of the girls working, hoping that other girls would enlist. and say often the girls did go back a second year, maybe not to the same camp, and then they would take their sister with them as well. So here we are at St. David's Camp. You see Darcy on the back of the truck. I'm going to talk about Darcy in a few minutes, and the girls doing their laundry. But that's how they would pile into the back of a truck to go to and from work. So that was the living accommodations at St. David's Camp in the top left-hand corner. The picture on the bottom left, Farmerettes on a picnic. Lincoln County had kind of a fall fair, late August, and Noreen Pye, that I met from Godrich, she had told me, or she had described this event to me, and I had read it in her letter that she had written home to her mother about a girl from Kapuskasing winning the Miss Lincoln County crown. And I found the picture, half a year later when I was doing research. I found it in the Fletcherton, Ontario newspaper, which is nowhere near Niagara Falls or St. Catharines. But I knew that the girl with the flowered dress, that dress had been purchased by Noreen to wear to her grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And the prize for winning this was a bouquet of glads and a bathing suit. And other girls at the camp loaned her shoes and jewelry and whatever. They were quite determined that this pretty young lady from Kapuskasing was going to be the winner. So this was taken at Ipperwash, not a great picture, but at least showing that the girls did go to the beach and, pose long enough to have a picture. Picture on the front of the book is the one on the left, and Barbara Murray, who's second from the left, is still alive. She lives in Fort Francis. She's now 97 years old. She did 2 years, 1941, which they called Pioneer Camp, and at Shanks, and 1942. The other girls, she knew their names, but she didn't know, their married names or where to find them, so we don't know their names. On the right, you'll see Gwen again, who was just in the picture in the onion fields. She was from Cornwall, and these other girls, one's from Kirkland Lake, and one's from Creighton Mines, way up north. The girls from Northern Ontario sure pitched in and came down and helped. There we are. See, those girls haven't got the pant legs rolled up quite as high as a lot of the girls' pictures. So Niagara Falls was a popular place for any girl being a farmerette in the Niagara Peninsula. They had to have pictures of Niagara in the background. Lots of fun had at Niagara Falls. So this was 1941. This was the summer of 1941. You can see the construction still happening at the Rainbow Bridge. And it was opened, I think it was November the 2nd at 1941 when traffic was allowed on there. So Mr. Shank and Son St. Catharines, that was an autograph that one of the girls kept from her farmerette days. The picture in the middle is Alan Donald, and his wife is still alive. She lives in Bedford in a retirement home. The other girls, we don't know the pictures. We're assuming that those are maybe candy cigarettes. I know Alan's is a for real cigarette. There's a lunch bucket there, so they're probably having a lunch break and say, let's get our picture taken with Alan. That picture is going to be on the label of the Farmerette Rosé that's being introduced on Mother's Day weekend by the Shale Ridge Winery and Cidery just outside of Bedford. And the girl on the right is banging the dinner bell. First, we thought it was a hockey stick, and then we were told, no, that's not a hockey stick, that's a shovel that she was clanging for the girls to come to meals. So there we are at Bedford again, and the girl second from the left is the lady that lives in London. So they got together with other girls and at other camps, and you can see they're having a wiener roast in the top middle picture, picking tomatoes in the bottom. And you can see some of the older women helping the young farmerette on the right. The man in the middle, not quite the middle, second from the right, bending over, picking. He worked at Shank Farm, and I think he was more like a supervisor or foreman. So the girls that worked for Mr. Shank not only harvested the vegetables, see all those huge cauliflowers, they actually went with Mr. Shank to the St. Catharines market. This is Mr. Chrysler and his Farmerettes, again in the Niagara Peninsula. The girls in the bottom right, Barbara Murray, that's her home in Simcoe. She invited the girls home for the weekend and they put their Farmerette uniforms on to have their picture taken. After the book was published, a lady named Edna Hawkins had her daughter email me and she said, "Tell Bonnie I'm the girl lying in the hay on the right-hand side." So things like that have happened since the book was published. We got to know some of the people. Transplanting on the top right-hand corner and standing on the roof of the outhouse. There was often fun comments about the outhouses. The biggest one we read about had 9 holes. The next best was 7 holes. The people in the picture on the left are from Arkona. And if any of you know Ralph or Mark Teeple, that is their father and their mother. She worked on the Teeple farm and the orchard farm as a farmerette. So girls in the onion fields and then the piles of onions drying. And we have the cherries getting weighed. That's what's happening there. And Barbara Murray working with the buckets of the wooden baskets of fruit. And working in the lettuce on the left. The girls, you can see they're obviously having a good time. They've got their long coats on over their bathing suits and they're headed for the Welland Canal. And with a sign clearly saying no admittance. The 4 girls on the right, you can't see Niagara Falls in the background, but that's where they're standing to have their picture taken with the falls behind them. So that was what was going through Canada Steamship Lines. That picture was submitted by one of the girls that was climbing over the fence. You can tell the age of the boat by the age of the cars there. The water was about 50 feet deep and no swimming allowed, but that didn't stop the girls from having a bit of fun. And we've got 3 girls from Kitchener here hitchhiking. And that would often be the way that the girls would have their evening meals, setting up or breakfast, setting at a long table. Riding to and from the fields on a flatbed, all girls on the top. On the bottom, you can see that there's a guy there and the girl beside him fell in love with him in 1945 and took another girlfriend with her and went back to camp in 1946, and then she married him. So this is what the equipment looked like at Sitter's when Shirleyan was there. Bill Sitter, my father-in-law on the left, his nephew, and then his son, George. And the peppermint was put in and it was boiled. That big circular, that big top would come up on the pulley and it would be clamped down and the pressure would be put on. And eventually the peppermint was distilled and little wee tiny bottles of it were then taken to Toronto to sell to Wrigley's. So there you are, girls having fun. They spilled the berries or the cherries and they're picking them up. And this girl obviously getting a much better tan than the ones with the legs not rolled up. So Nissen huts, named after Mr. Nissen, who designed them. 4 girls would sleep in each of these Nissen huts. Picking peaches on the left, top right, that's what the dining area and the place where the jukebox was at the Bedford camp. And the girls outside the Bedford camp, quite a lovely clear picture, and one girl showing that she knows how to smoke. These are all taken at the in the Bedford area, and I think the man second from the right is a Mr. Love. So we've got a farmerette, part of the farmerette uniform with the farmerette brigade pin. Mr. Shank obviously well loved by the Farmerettes because they thought enough to take a picture of him. And 1946, that was a Christmas card that Peggy Burt got and sent to her friend, wishing her a season's greetings. So there's a bigger picture of those girls down on their knees, working in the onion fields. One farmerette from Clinton got to Vineland and got a little homesick, so she phoned her boyfriend, Joe Gibson, who's in the middle of the pack, and this was the Huron group called the Clattering Pistons, and Joe rode down to Vineland to see Isabel, stayed too late, and the cook let him sleep in the cookhouse. And the next time he went down, he took his friends with him because all the girls were jealous that Isabel had a boyfriend with a Harley Davidson. Girls at the Bedford camp, a group picture. These girls were at Bedford too. The one second from the right, still alive, lives at Campbellford, Ontario. She doesn't remember where they were when they decided to pose with the fancy convertible, but she knows that's her in the picture. She sent it to me. So intercamp competitions, seeing who had could win, the best camping proficiency badge, and this was at Fenwick Camp, I think it was. Yes, Fenwick is written right on there. So we know what this girl did the day the war ended, May the 8th, 1945. As far as Europe was considered, Bessie was on her way over to Niagara Falls. And after the book was published, a man called from Cohill near Bancroft wanted the book. He said, I know my mother was a farmerette, but I don't know her story. He bought the book, and she is one of the ladies that wrote to Shirleyan in 1995, her stories in the book, so you can imagine how delighted he was when he got the book and read. And he had never paid attention to the date stamp on this permit that he shared with me. So now he knows as well what his mother did the day the war ended. So some more girls posing for a farmerette picture, posing with the farmer, all cleaned up on Sunday probably. So here's Darcy Crop showing off some of his grapes. He was one of the favorite farmers in the book, and he not only had the orchards and the vegetable gardens, he had the canning factories, and he had Illumination brand peaches, Darcy Crop. And if you go to Niagara Falls, you'll see a street named after this man. So some more tractors, farmerette uniform. Girls traveled from Toronto to Port Dalhousie on the ship called the Cayuga. It was about $1 each way to get across Lake Ontario. More girls and guys. Camp Bedford, both on the top and bottom right. We don't know the names of any of these people, unfortunately. So there they are, putting a flag up on the camp house. There's a better picture of the Cayuga. And Barbara Murray could not remember why on earth they were digging this narrow trench, but that's her second from the right, the lady that lives in Fort Francis. This is what Niagara Falls would have looked like in the 1940s. So living in a tent, 4 girls to a tent. And they didn't seem to complain about lack of space or anything. They just made the best of it. They worked hard, they had fun, and the camaraderie made up for a lot of things. These are girls working at Bedford. The oil painting by Joan Tovey. This lady lives up in the Kawarthas, and she is 92 now. And this was painted from a little black and white photo that was taken at the Sitter farm. She's still painting, and she couldn't remember when I tracked her down. She couldn't remember who she worked for, but when she got the book, she said, "Oh, now I know who I worked for. I see Grandpa Sitter there." So we've come to the end. I think we've probably taken up way more than our time, but there we are. That's the end. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this presentation by Shirleyan English and Bonnie Sitter for the Strathroy and District Historical Society. For more information, please visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/Strathroy Historical Society or visit our website at sdhsociety.weebly.com. Thank you.